Chapter 25, Part 1 of Etiquette. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Kara Schallenberg. Etiquette in Society, in Business, in Politics, and at Home by Emily Post. Chapter 25, The Country House and its Hospitality. Part 1. The difference between the great house with 20 to 50 guest rooms, all numbered like the rooms in a hotel, and the house of ordinary good size with from 4 to 6 guest rooms, or the farmhouse or small cottage which has but one best spare chamber, with perhaps a man's room on the ground floor, is much the same as the difference between the elaborate wedding and the simplest, one merely of degree and not of kind. To be sure, in the great house week-end guests often include those who are little more than acquaintances of the host and hostess, whereas the visitor occupying the only spare room is practically always an intimate friend. Excepting therefore that people who have few visitors never ask anyone on their general list, and that those who fill an enormous house time and time again necessarily do, the etiquette, manners, guest-room appointments, and the people who occupy them are precisely the same. Popular opinion to the contrary, a man's social position is by no means proportionate to the size of his house, and even though he lives in a bungalow, he may have every bit as high a position in the world of fashion as his rich neighbor in his palace, often much better. We all of us know a Mr. Newgold who would give many of the treasures in his marble palace for a single invitation to Mrs. Oldname's comparatively little house, and half of all he possesses for the latter's knowledge, appearance, manner, instincts, and position, none of which he himself is likely ever to acquire, though his children may. But in our description of great or medium or small houses, we are considering those only whose owners belong equally to best society, and where, though luxuries vary from the greatest to the least, house appointments are in essentials alike. This is a rather noteworthy fact. All people of good position talk alike, behave alike, and live alike. Ill-mannered servants, incorrect liveries or service, sloppily dished food, carelessness in any of the details that to well-bred people constitute the decencies of living, are no more tolerated in the smallest cottage than in the palace. But since the biggest houses are those which naturally attract most attention, suppose we begin our detailed description with them. House party of many guests. Perhaps there are 10, or perhaps there are 40 guests, but if there were only 2 or 3, and the house a little instead of a big one, the details would be precisely the same. A week-end means from Friday afternoon or from Saturday lunch to Monday morning. The usual time chosen for a house party is over a holiday, particularly where the holiday falls on a Friday or Monday, so that the men can take a Saturday off and stay from Friday to Tuesday, or Thursday to Monday. On whichever day the party begins, every one arrives in the neighborhood of 5 o'clock, or a day later at lunchtime. Many come in their own cars, the others are met at the station, sometimes by the host or a son, or, if it is to be a young party, by a daughter. The hostess herself rarely, if ever, goes to the station, not because of indifference or discourtesy, but because other guests, coming by motor, might find the house empty. It is very rude for a hostess to be out when her guests arrive. Even someone who comes so often as to be entirely at home is apt to feel dispirited upon being shown into an empty house. Sometimes a guest's arrival unwelcomed cannot be avoided, if, for instance, a man invited for tennis week or a football or baseball game arrives before the game is over, but too late to join the others at the sport. When younger people come to visit the daughters, it is not necessary that their mother stay at home, since the daughters take their mother's place. Nor is it necessary that she receive the men friends of her son, unless the latter, for some unavoidable reason, is absent. No hostess must ever fail to send a card to the station or boat landing for every one who is expected. If she has not conveyances enough of her own, she must order public ones, and have the fares charged to herself. Greeting of the host. The host always goes out into the front hall and shakes hands with everyone who arrives. He asks the guests if they want to be shown to their rooms, and if not, sees that the gentlemen who come without valets give their keys to the butler or footman, and that the ladies without maids of their own give theirs to the maid who is on duty for the purpose. Should any of them feel dusty or otherwise untidy, they naturally ask if they may be shown to their rooms, so that they can make themselves presentable. They should not, however, linger longer than necessary, as their hostess may become uneasy at their delay. Ladies do not, in fashionable houses, make their first appearance without a hat. Gentlemen, needless to say, leave theirs in the hall when they come in. Travel in the present day, however, whether in parlor car or closed limousines, or even in open cars on macadam roads, obviates the necessity for an immediate removing of travel stains, so that instead of seeking their rooms, the newcomers usually go directly into the library, or out on the veranda, or wherever the hostess is to be found behind the inevitable tea-tray. Greeting of the hostess. As soon as her guests appear in the doorway, the hostess at once rises, goes forward smiling, shakes hands, and tells them how glad she is that they have safely come, or how glad she is to see them, and leads the way to the tea-table. This is one of the occasions when everyone is always introduced. Good manners also demand that the places nearest the hostess be vacated by those occupying them, and that the newly arrived receive attention from the hostess, who sees that they are supplied with tea, sandwiches, cakes, and whatever the tea-table affords. After tea, people either sit around and talk, or more likely nowadays they play bridge. About an hour before dinner the hostess asks how long everyone needs to dress, and tells them the time. If any need a shorter time than she must allow for herself, she makes sure that they know the location of their rooms, and goes to dress. A room for every guest. It is almost unnecessary to say that in no well-appointed house is a guest, except under 3 circumstances, put in a room with any one else. The 3 exceptions are: 1. A man and wife, if the hostess is sure beyond a doubt that they occupy similar quarters when at home. 2. 2 young girls who are friends and have volunteered, because the house is crowded, to room together in a room with 2 beds. 3. On an occasion such as a wedding, a ball, or an intercollegiate athletic event, young people don't mind for one night, that is spent for the greater part up, how many are doubled, and house-room is limited merely to cot space, sofas, and even the billiard table. But she would be a very clumsy hostess who, for a week-end, filled her house like a sardine box, to the discomfort and resentment of everyone. In the well-appointed house, every guest-room has a bath adjoining for itself alone, or shared with a connecting room, and used only by a man and wife, 2 women, or 2 men. A bathroom should never, if avoidable, be shared by a woman and a man. A suitable accommodation for a man and wife is a double room with bath, and a single room next. The guest room. The perfect guest room is not necessarily a vast chamber decorated in an historically correct period. Its perfection is the result of nothing more difficult to attain than painstaking attention to detail, and its possession is within the reach of every woman who has the means to invite people to her house in the first place. The ideal guest room is never found except in the house of the ideal hostess, and it is by no means idle talk to suggest that every hostess be obliged to spend 24 hours, every now and then, in each room that is set apart for visitors. If she does not do this actually, she should do so in imagination. She should occasionally go into the guest bathroom and draw the water in every fixture, to see there is no stoppage, and that the hot water faucets are not seemingly jokes of the plumber. If a man is to occupy the bathroom, she must see that the hook for a razor strop is not missing, and that there is a mirror by which he can see to shave both at night and by daylight. Even though she can see to powder her nose, it would be safer to make her husband bathe and shave both a morning and an evening in each bathroom, and then listen carefully to what he says about it. Even though she has a perfect housemaid, it is not unwise occasionally to make sure herself that every detail has been attended to, that in every bathroom there are plenty of bath towels, face towels, a freshly laundered wash rag, bath mat, a new cake of unscented bath soap in the bathtub soap rack, and a new cake of scented soap on the washstand. It is not expected, but it is often very nice to find violet water, bath salts, Listerine, talcum powder, almond or other hand or sunburn lotion in decorated bottles on the washstand shelf, but to cover the dressing table in the bedroom with brushes and an array of toilet articles is more of a nuisance than a comfort. A good clothes brush and whisk broom are usually very acceptable, as, strangely enough, guests almost invariably forget them. A comforting adjunct to a bathroom that is given to a woman is a hot water bottle with a woolen cover hanging on the back of the door. Even if the water does not run sufficiently hot, a guest seldom hesitates to ring for that, whereas no one ever likes to ask for a hot water bag, no matter how much she might long for it. A small bottle of pyro is also convenient for one who brings a curling lamp. In the bedroom, the hostess should make sure, by sleeping in it at least once, that the bed is comfortable, that the sheets are long enough to tuck in, that there are enough pillows for one who sleeps with head high. There must also be plenty of covers. Besides the blankets, there should be a wool-filled or an eiderdown quilt, in coloring to go with the room. There should be a night light at the head of the bed. Not just a decorative glowworm effect, but a light that is really good to lie in bed and read by. And always there should be books, chosen more to divert than to engross. The sort of selection appropriate for a guest room might best comprise 2 or 3 books of the moment, a light novel, a book of essays, another of short stories, and a few of the latest magazines. Spare room books ought to be especially chosen for the expected guest. Even though one cannot choose accurately for the taste of another, one can at least guess whether the visitor is likely to prefer transcendental philosophy or detective stories, and supply either accordingly. There should be a candle and a box of matches. Even though there is electric light, it has been known to go out, and some people like to burn a candle all night. There must also be matches and ash receivers on the desk, and a scrap basket beside it. In hot weather, every guest should have a palm leaf fan, and in August, even though there are screens, a fly killer. In big houses with a swimming pool, bathrobes are supplied, and often bathing suits. Otherwise, dressing gowns are not part of any guest room equipment. A comfortable sofa is very important, if the room is big enough, with a sofa pillow or 2, and with a lightweight quilt or afghan across the end of it. The hostess should do her own hair in each room to see if the dressing table is placed where there is a good light over it, both by electric and by daylight. A very simple expedient in a room where massive furniture and low windows make the daylight dressing table difficult is the European custom of putting an ordinary small table directly in the window and standing a good-sized mirror on it. Nothing makes a more perfect arrangement for a woman. And the pin-cushion. It is more than necessary to see that the pins are usable and not rust to the head. There should be black ones and white ones, long and short, and also safety pins in several sizes. 3 or 4 threaded needles of white thread, black, gray, and tan silk are an addition that has proved many times welcome. She must also examine the writing desk to be sure that the ink is not a cracked patch of black dust at the bottom of the well, and the pens solid rust, and the writing paper textures and sizes at odds with the envelopes. There should be a fresh blotter and a few stamps. Also, thoughtful hostesses put a card in some convenient place giving the post office schedule and saying where the mail bag can be found. And a calendar, and a clock that goes. Is there anything more typical of the average spare room than the clock that is at a standstill? There must be plenty of clothes hangers in the closets. For the women a few hat stands, and for men trouser hangers, and the coat hangers that have a bar across the shoulder piece. It is unnecessary to add that every bureau drawer should be looked into to see that nothing belonging to the family is filling the space which should belong to the guest, and that the white paper lining the bottom is new. Curtains and sofa pillows must, of course, be freshly laundered, the furniture, floor, walls, and ceiling unmarred and in perfect order. When bells are being installed in new houses, they should be on cords and hung at the side of the bed. Light switches should be placed at the side of the door going into the room and bathroom. It is scarcely practical to change the wiring in old houses, but it can at least be seen that the bells work. People who like strong perfumes often mistakenly think they are giving pleasure in filling all the bedroom drawers with pads heavily scented. Instead of feeling pleasure, some people are made almost sick. But all people, hay fever patients excepted, love flowers, and vases of them beautify rooms as nothing else can. Even a shabby little room, if dustlessly clean and filled with flowers, loses all effect of shabbiness, and is inviting instead. In a hunting country there should be a boot-jack and boot-hooks in the closet. Guest rooms should have shutters and dark shades for those who like to keep the morning sun out. The rooms should also, if possible, be away from the kitchen end of the house and the nursery. A shortcoming in many houses is the lack of a newspaper, and the thoughtful hostess who has the morning paper sent up with each breakfast tray, or has one put at each place on the breakfast table, deserves a halo. At night a glass and a thermos pitcher of water should be placed by the bed. In a few very specially appointed houses, a small glass-covered tray of food is also put on the bed table, fruit or milk and sandwiches, or whatever is marked on the guest card. The guest card. A clever device was invented by Mrs. Gilding, whose palatially appointed house is run with the most painstaking attention to everyone's comfort. On the dressing table in each spare room at Golden Hall is a card pad with a pencil attached to it. But if the guest card is used, a specimen is given below. Needless to say, the cards are used only in huge houses that, because of their size, are necessarily run more like a clubhouse than as a home. In every house the questions below are asked by the hostess, though the guests may not readily perceive the fact. At bedtime she always asks, "Would you like to come down to breakfast, or will you have it in your room?" If the guest says in her room, she is then asked what she would like to eat. She is also asked whether she cares for milk, or fruit, or other light refreshment at bedtime, and if there is a special book she would like to take up to her room. The guest card mentioned above is as follows: Please fill this out before going down to dinner. What time do you want to be awakened? Or will you ring? Will you breakfast upstairs or down? Underscore your order: coffee, tea, chocolate, milk, oatmeal, hominy, shredded wheat, eggs, how cooked, rolls, muffins, toast, orange, pear, grapes, melon. At bedtime, will you take hot or cold milk, cocoa, orangeade, sandwiches, meat, lettuce, jam, cake, crackers, oranges, apples, pears, grapes. Besides this list, there is a catalogue of the library with a card, clipped to the cover, saying, Following books for room number X, then 4 or 6 blank lines, and a place for the guest's signature. At the dinner hour. Every one goes down to dinner as promptly as possible, and the procedure is exactly that of all dinners. If it is a big party, the gentlemen offer their arms to the ladies the host or hostess has designated. At the end of the evening, it is the custom that the hostess suggest going upstairs, rather than the guests, who ordinarily depart after dinner. But etiquette is not very strictly followed in this, and a reasonable time after dinner, if anyone is especially tired, he or she quite frankly says, "I wonder if you would mind very much if I went to bed?" The hostess always answers, "Why, no, certainly not. I hope you will find everything in your room. If not, will you ring?" It is not customary for the hostess to go upstairs with a guest, so long as others remain in her drawing-room. If there is only one lady, or a young girl, the hostess accompanies her to her room, and asks if everything has been thought of for her comfort. How guests are asked and received. Many older ladies adhere to former practice and always write personal notes of invitation. All others write or telegraph to people at a distance, and send telephone messages to those nearby. When a house is to be filled with friends of daughters or sons of the house, the young people in the habit of coming to the house, or young men, whether making a first visit or not, do not need any invitation further than one given them verbally by a daughter or even a son. But a married couple, or a young girl invited for the first time, should have the verbal invitation of daughter or son seconded by a note or at least a telephone message sent by the mother herself. Everyone is always asked for a specific time. Even a near relative comes definitely for a week, or a month, or whatever period is selected. This is because other plans have to be made by the owners of the house, such as inviting another group of guests, or preparing to go away themselves. Who are asked on house parties? Excepting when strangers bring influential letters of introduction, or when a relative or very intimate friend recently married is invited with her new husband or his bride, only very large and general house parties include anyone who is not an intimate friend. At least 70% of American house parties are young people, either single or not long married, and in any event all those asked to any one party, unless the hostess is a failure or a genius, belong to the same social group. Perhaps a more broad-minded attitude prevails among young people in other parts of the country, but willfully narrow-minded Miss Young New York is very chary of accepting an invitation until she finds out who, among her particular friends, are also invited. If Mrs. Stranger asks her for a weekend, no matter how much she may like Mrs. Stranger personally, She at once telephones 2 or 3 of her own group. If some of them are going, she accepts with pleasure, but if not, the chances are she regrets. If, on the other hand, she is asked by the Gildings, she accepts at once. Not merely because Golden Hall is the ultimate in luxury, but because Mrs. Gilding has a gift for entertaining, including her selection of people, amounting to genius. On the other hand, Miss Young New York would accept with equal alacrity the invitation of the Jack Littlehouses, where there is no luxury at all. Here, in fact, a guest is quite as likely as not to be pressed into service as auxiliary nurse, gardener, or chauffeur. But the personality of the host and hostess is such that there is scarcely a day in the week when the motors of the most popular of the younger set are not parked at the Little House door. People we love to stay with. We enjoy staying with certain people usually for one of 2 reasons. First, because they have wonderful luxurious houses filled with amusing people, and visiting them is a period crammed with continuous and delightful experience, even though such a visit has little that suggests any personal intercourse or friendship with one's hostess. The other reason we love to visit a certain house is, on the contrary, entirely personal to the host or hostess. We love the house because we love its owner. Nowhere do we feel so much at home, and though it may have none of the imposing magnificence of the great house, it is often far more charming. 5 flunkies cannot do more towards a guest's comfort than to take his hat and stick and to show him the way to the drawing-room. A very smart young New Yorker, who is also something of a wag, says that when going to a very magnificent house, he always tries to wear sufficient articles so that he shall have one to bestow upon each footman. Someone saw him, upon entering a palace that is a counterpart of the Worldly's, quite solemnly hand his hat to the first footman, his stick to the second, his coat to the third, his muffler to the fourth, his gloves to the fifth, and his name to the 6th, as he entered the drawing-room. Needless to say, he did this as a matter of pure amusement to himself. Of course, 6 men-servants, or more, do add to the impressiveness of a house that is a palace, and are a fitting part of the picture. And yet a neat maid-servant at the door can divest a guest of his hat and coat, and lead the way to the sitting-room with equal facility. Having several times mentioned Golden Hall, the palatial country house of the Gildings, suppose we join the guests, and see what the last word in luxury and lavish hospitality is. Golden Hall is not an imaginary place, except in name. It exists within 100 miles of New York. The house is a palace, the grounds are a park. There is not only a long wing of magnificent guest-rooms in the house, occupied by young girls or important older people, but there is also a guest annex, a separate building, designed and run like the most luxurious country club. The 2nd floor has nothing but bedrooms, with bath for each. The 3rd floor has bachelor rooms, and rooms for visiting valets. Visiting maids are put in a separate 3rd-floor wing. On the ground floor there is a small breakfast-room, a large living-room filled with books, magazines, a billiard and pool table. Beyond the living-room is a fully equipped gymnasium. And beyond that a huge, white marble, glass-walled natatorium. The swimming pool is 50 feet by 100. On 3 sides is just a narrow shelf-like walkway, but the 4th is wide and is furnished as a room, with lounging chairs upholstered in white oilcloth. Opening out of this are perfectly equipped Turkish and Russian baths, in charge of the best Swedish masseur and masseuse procurable. In the same building are 2 squash courts, a racket court, a tennis court, and a bowling alley. But the feature of the guest building is a glass-roofed and enclosed riding ring, not big enough for games of polo, but big enough for practice in winter, built along one entire side of it. The stables are full of polo ponies and hunters, the garage full of cars. The boathouse has every sort of boat, sailboats, naphtha launches, a motor boat, and even a shell. Every amusement is open-heartedly offered, in fact, especially devised for the guests. At the main house there is a ballroom with a stage at one end. An orchestra plays every night. New moving pictures are shown, and vaudeville talent is imported from New York. This is the extreme of luxury in entertaining. As Mrs. Toplofty said at the end of a bewilderingly lavish party, "How are any of us ever going to amuse anyone after this? I feel like doing my guest rooms up in mothballs." No one, however, has discovered that invitations to Mrs. Toplofty's are any less welcome. Besides, excitement-loving youth and exercise devotees were never favored guests at the Hudson Manor anyway. The small house of perfection. It matters not in the slightest whether the guest-room's carpet is Aubusson or rag, whether the furniture is antique or modern, so long as it is pleasing of its kind. On the other hand, because a house is little is no reason that it cannot be as perfect in every detail, perhaps more so, as the palace of the multiest millionaire. The attributes of the perfect house cannot be better represented than by Brook Meadows Farm, the all-the-year home of the old names. Nor can anything better illustrate its perfection than an incident that actually took place there. A great friend of the old names, but not a man who went at all into society, or considered whether people had position or not, was invited with his new wife, a woman from another state, and of much wealth and discernment, to stay over a week-end at Brook Meadows. Never having met the old names, she asked something about their house and life, in order to decide what type of clothes to pack. "Oh, it's just a little farmhouse. Old name wears a dinner coat, of course. His wife wears I don't know what, but I have never seen her dressed up a bit." Evidently plain people, thought his wife. And aloud, "I wonder what evening dress I have that is high enough. I can put in the black lace day dress. Perhaps I had better put in my cerise satin." "The cerise?" asked her husband. "Is that the red you had on the other night? It is much too handsome, much. I tell you, Mrs. Oldname never wears a dress that you could notice. She always looks like a lady, but she isn't a dressy sort of person at all." So the bride packed her plainest, that is, her cheapest, clothes, but at the last she put in the cerise. When she and her husband arrived at the railroad station, that at least was primitive enough, and Mr. Oldname in much-worn tweeds might have come from a castle or a cabin. Country clothes are no evidence. But her practised eye noticed the perfect cut of the chauffeur's coat, and that the car, though of an inexpensive make, was one of the prettiest on the market, and beautifully appointed. At least they have good taste in motors and accessories, thought she, and was glad she had brought her best evening dress. They drove up to a low, white-shingled house at the end of an old-fashioned brick walk bordered with flowers. The visitor noticed that the flowers were all of one color, all in perfect bloom. She knew no inexperienced gardener had produced that apparently simple approach to a door that has been chosen as a frontispiece in more than one book on colonial architecture. The door was opened by a maid in a silver-gray taffeta dress, with organdy collar, cuffs, and apron, white stockings, and silver buckles on black slippers, and the guest saw a quaint hall and vista of rooms that at first sight might easily be thought simple by an inexpert appraiser. But Mrs. Oldname, who came forward to greet her guests, was the antithesis of everything the bride's husband had led her to believe. To describe Mrs. Oldname as simple is about as apt as to call a pearl simple, because it doesn't dazzle. Nor was there an article in the apparently simple living-room that would be refused were it offered to a museum. The tea-table was Chinese Chippendale, and set with old Spode on a lacquered tray over a mosaic embroidered linen tea-cloth. The soda biscuits and cakes were light as froth, the tea an especial blend imported by a prominent connoisseur and given every Christmas to his friends. There were 3 other guests besides the bride and groom, a United States senator and a diplomat and his wife who were on their way from a post in Europe to one in South America. Instead of bridge, there was conversation on international topics until it was time to dress for dinner. When the bride went to her room, which adjoined that of her husband, she found her bath drawn, her clothes laid out, and the dressing-table lights lighted. That night the bride wore her cerise dress to one of the smartest dinners she ever went down to, and when they went upstairs and she at last saw her husband alone, she took him to task. "Why, in the name of goodness, didn't you tell me the truth about these people?" "Oh," said he, abashed, "I told you it was a little house. It was you who insisted on bringing that red dress. I told you it was too handsome." "Handsome!" she cried in tears. "I don't own anything half good enough to compare with the least article in this house. That simple little woman, as you call her, would, I think, almost make a queen seem provincial. And as for her clothes, they are priceless, just as everything is in this little gem of a house. Why, the window curtains are as fine as the best clothes in my trousseau." The 2 houses contrasted above are 2 extremes, but each a luxury. The Oldnames' expenditure, though in no way comparable with the Worldleys' or the Gildings', is far beyond any purse that can be called moderate. The really moderate purse inevitably precludes a woman from playing an important rôle as hostess, for not even the greatest magnetism and charm can make up to spoiled guests for lack of essential comfort. The only exceptions are a bungalow at the seashore, or a camp in the woods, where a confirmed luxury lover is desperately uncomfortable for the first 24 hours, but invariably gets used to the lack of comfort almost as soon as he gets dependent upon it, and, plunging into a lake for a bath, or washing in a little tin basin, sleeping on pine boughs without any sheets at all, eating tinned foods and flapjacks on tin plates with tin utensils, he seems to lack nothing when the air is like champagne and the company first choice. End of Chapter 25, Part 1. Read by Kara Schallenberg, www.kray.org, on April 16, 2007, in Oceanside, California.